the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. Hello, Justin.
Hey, Lindsay.
Honestly, Justin, I'm really happy you wanted to do this. I was surprised that you were the one that suggested Donnie Darko.
Why is that?
Because my experience with this movie was every guy in film school was like all about this, like drooling over Donnie Darko, and it made me not want to see it. And I thought that maybe you would rebuff this movie because of that. That I don't think we've had a conversation about Donnie Darko before.
I think this is a movie that I didn't like when it came out.
Yeah.
Which is odd that you bring up the film school stuff because I myself had just gotten out of film school. And when I watched this movie, I just thought it was overly pretentious, and it seemed like a movie someone would make just out of film school that was being overly ambitious.
Okay.
This movie's grown. I think this is probably, I would say, a top cult film of the last 20 years, has been talked about and discussed, and so many people have had different theories on what the movie's about. And so I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, I think we talked about it briefly, and then I finally sat down and watched it because you were the one that said, man, I think that would make a good episode. And I sat down and watched it with an open mind. I think I just saw the movie a little bit differently and then did a couple more watches. And to say you need to watch it a few times, I think shows a weakness in the film. But there's a lot of movies that I really, truly love that I didn't like in the beginning, but after multiple watches, you see more things. You find things buried in the film that you didn't see before, and it becomes a much more pleasurable watch. And this is definitely one of those movies for me. And I've really grown to appreciate the movie, and it feels less pretentious to me than when I initially saw it when it was released in 2001.
So my experience of it was that I expected it to be pretentious because I saw all of these. I just worked in the place where you rented film equipment, and people were drooling over this movie, like I said, and it made me not want to see it. And then eventually I did, and Donnie Darko has become strangely my comfort movie. Like when I'm feeling low, this movie kind of recenters me. And for being as bleak of a film that this is, I don't know, it kind of makes sense in the person that I am. But again, a movie that I tried to not go with, but then found out quickly how special this movie is.
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this movie, and I've said this many times to you and on the podcast, is that I love first efforts from filmmakers that have gone on to have big careers. And it's always interesting to me, especially if it's a very young filmmaker like Richard Kelly, who was 25 when he made Donnie Darko, which is, I think, telling and why this movie was so ambitious. He was just kind of swinging for the fences and like, I'm just going to try to cover all these wide ranges of ideas and philosophies and put them in, kind of cram them into this movie. And even in interviews, when you listen to him, especially interviews that have taken place not too long after Donnie Darko was released, he himself seems not to be able to answer a lot of questions that people have about the movie to some extent. Like I think he likes the idea of the movie taking on this own new interpretation from audiences, and that it's sort of grown into this like legendary question about, is this a movie about Donnie Darko's subconscious? Is this a movie about a superhero? Is this a movie about the end of the world? Is it a movie about mental illness? So many people have had different ideas on what the movie means to them and what it's about. And so I doubt that we're only going to be able to scratch the surface of what this movie means to
everyone out there.
Yeah, but we'll certainly try to best we can get into what we got out of the movie after multiple viewings. And I don't know, I'm glad we chose this movie because it's a little bit different movie than we normally do. It was a very small budget is very ambitious, and really surprised at how many people they were able to get to jump on board into this movie. You know, it's like wild to see Patrick Swayze, Drew Barrymore, and then early appearances by Jake Gyllenhaal and his sister Maggie Gyllenhaal.
For not having a large budget, I mean, $4.5 million is nothing to sneeze at, but for as many names that are in this, for the effects, for what it was trying to accomplish, and what a complex film it is a pretty meager budget for that. And we're going to get into how this movie came to be. There is quite a little story on Richard Kelly, writer-director, fighting to make this movie even happen. And like the story of Donnie Darko, it feels like there's a lot of things that were just chance and hope that actually made this movie come to fruition.
Yeah, there's so many aspects to this movie that could have just gone wrong. You know what I mean? That just...
there were a lot of easy outs on this to just throw it in the trash.
Yeah, and just a way to, you know, I think this was a difficult movie for a studio to get behind, to say, this kid has never made a feature film before and he's got this crazy ambitious script. Can he pull this off? More or less he did. You know, I mean, at least it seems like he got what he wanted out of the movie, stood by the film and made the ending how he wanted it, despite the studio kind of wanting him to change things, and certainly how I think confusing this movie can be to allow a movie like this to happen. Watching this movie, I got this sense of like, we don't really see too many movies like this anymore that have like a decent budget, that are a little bit challenging, and don't wrap up everything nice and neatly for an audience. Don't get me wrong, I love neatly wrapped movies that have a beginning, middle, and end, and, you know, bring things back at the end that happen and have a nice ending. Those movies I do enjoy a lot. In a movie like Donnie Darko, you know, I won't lie, it's not a movie that I can just sit down and watch any old time. But I do love movies like this, to where, you know, it really makes me centered and focused and say, you know, allows me to watch something with more of an open mind. And it makes me feel good to know movies like this are still being made, even though not as often, but are getting budgets like $4 or $5 million that aren't your everyday average normal movie, and are a little bit avant-garde, a little bit experimental, but still are trying to say something. And I think this movie was trying to, you know, Richard Kelly had a lot to say, was trying to, you know, maybe at times cram too much into the movie. But again, we'll get into it. There's definitely so many conversations could be had on what is happening in between the scenes in this movie.
And I hope we can peel back some of the layers in this. One of the most beautiful things about Donnie Darko is that there are so many different interpretations about it. And you can sit down and watch it with a mindset of, okay, I'm going to look at it for just this reason, or just on the, if we're looking at it like Donnie's been chosen by some predetermined force out there, or if Donnie has a mental illness, or if it's all a dream. If you watch it, you know, you can kind of make up your own avenue and story. Like for me, I feel like I know what this movie's about, but there's still questions even for me when I feel confident in explaining the movie, that at the end of the day, I'm still left wondering what if, and in so many instances in this film. And I think for a film that's now 23 years old, that I've seen too many times to count, I mean, there's not very many films I can say that still have that effect on me.
Well, we'll get a lot of Donnie Darko talk in. And after that, our picks of the week, I went with a Jake Gyllenhaal movie, a very, very dark film called Prisoners, which I know you haven't seen, Lindsay, but I highly recommend. And I just rewatched it the other night, and wow, that movie, it is intense. That's all. I'll talk more about it in a little bit. What was your pick of the week?
I almost went the Jake Gyllenhaal route, but I decided to go with James Duvall, who plays Frank the Bunny in Donnie Darko. I went with Greg Araki's Nowhere from 1997.
I know you love your Greg Araki.
I do. Won't ever stop.
Well, I'm excited to hear about Nowhere.
Have you seen it before?
That is not one that I've seen yet. Okay. So I'm glad that this is one of those episodes where we'll change movies after it's all over.
My version of this that I watched, because it doesn't exist right now anyway on like a decent format. I don't have a VHS copy like that was manufactured. It's just pirated from a rental from 20 years ago, and it has that nice.
Oh.
So I watched it like that, but still, I love it that much. I'll watch an hour and a half of.
That says a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about Nowhere. Well, as always, we'll round things out with our Murray moment. But before we get into our first clip from Donnie Darko, Lindsay, if you can try your best, a very condensed version of what this movie is about. It's probably the most difficult challenge I think you've had in having to summarize such a vastly strange film.
With so many supporting and tangential stories, too. But ultimately, this movie is called Donnie Darko, and it is about him and the community that surrounds him. And no one could have predicted a mysterious jet engine falling on a teenager's room would be the linchpin of the most unusual events of 1988 in Middlesex, Virginia. No one except Donnie Darko, who narrowly escaped death in the freak accident. Luckily for Donnie, an ominous voice from the form of a human-sized monstrous rabbit named Frank aroused him from his bed that night. Preying on Donnie's tendency to sleepwalk, Frank unveils a revelation to him. In 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds, the world will end. Plagued with more sleepwalking, waking dreams, and disturbing visions, Donnie receives guidance from Frank, his family, peers, and teachers who've seen his quiet empathy and intelligence. As he continues to chip away at this mystery and challenge other wrongs in his reality, Donnie discovers a local hermit who wrote a book on time travel, and with that, the pieces begin to align and make sense for him. This is a story of a young man who was chosen for a larger purpose. When something unbelievable or unexpected enters a world, a universe can turn upside down. And in this case, the only one who can restore order is Donnie Darko.
That's quite lovely. Thank you for that.
It's the only way I can summarize it.
Well, let's get into more of what this movie's about. Let's go to a clip. We'll be right back.
I'm voting for Dukakis.
Well, maybe when you have children of your own who need braces and you can't afford them because half of your husband's paycheck goes to the federal government, you'll regret that.
My
decision.
husband's paycheck?
Oh.
Anyway, I'm not gonna squeeze one out till I'm like 30.
Will you still be working at the yarn barn? Because I hear that's a really great place to raise children.
That's really funny.
No, I think a year of partying's enough. She'll be going to Harvard next fall.
I haven't even gotten in yet.
Do you honestly think Michael Dukakis will provide for this country till you're ready to squeeze one out?
Yeah, I do.
When can I squeeze one out?
Not until 8th grade.
Excuse me.
Donnie, you're such a dick.
Whoa, Elizabeth. Little hostile there. Maybe you should be the one in therapy, then Mom and Dad can pay someone $200 an hour to listen to all your thoughts, so we don't have to.
Okay. You want to tell Mom and Dad why you stopped taking your medication?
You're such a fuck-ass.
What?
Please.
Did you just call me a fuck-ass?
Elizabeth, that's enough.
You can go suck a fuck.
Oh, please tell me, Elizabeth, how exactly does one suck a fuck?
You want me to tell you?
Please, tell me.
We will not have this at the dinner table. Stop.
What's a fuck ass?
Now, I'll try my best not to come off bitter sounding as I start up here, but lately I've been watching a lot of, trailers and stuff like that, and I'm in different film groups on Facebook, and I think the thing that bothers me the most, and I'll get off the soapbox very quickly, is sort of the quick comment of, someone will see a trailer, someone will watch a movie, and it'll just say, well, that was hot garbage. And I get it. I get that not every movie is going to be great, but it's very, very difficult to make a decent film, much less a great one. Also, someone starting out to make a film, just simple, just a film that's clear, that, the acting was fine, they pulled off the shots, when they cut it all together, it resembled a film. And that in and of itself is a real challenge if you've read any behind the scenes. To me, it's I feel like we've reached a point in society where people are so dismissive of that, at least on the internet. And I know that's my fault. I should stop reading comments. It's a bad addiction.
I understand. I really do.
But sometimes I need that because it sort of redirects my brain to make me reappreciate things. And when I sit down to watch a movie like Donnie Darko, it is a very almost overly ambitious, confusing movie that I think could easily be written off and say, oh, this is pretentious crap, and someone shuts it off in 20 minutes. But for someone like Richard Kelly, who is fresh out of film school, 24, 25 years old, didn't choose a simple route. When you're starting out, they're like, write what you know, keep it simple. Certainly no one says make a time-traveling, confusing psychological horror film that has various timelines, is also a period piece, and has like multiple visual effects and has a story that's hard to follow. Those are usually things you want to avoid, but Richard Kelly like dove headfirst into a script that I think could have confused a lot of people or turned a lot of people off. And he certainly hit those walls that he faced with trying to get this movie made, trying to get people to read the script. But just in and of itself, I think only a person in their 20s would write a movie like Donnie Darko and try something this ambitious. And it reminded me of filmmakers like George Lucas with THX 1138 or David Lynch doing Eraserhead. These filmmakers that didn't choose the easy route and decided to think big, created something that is unusual, found their place in film history. And that's why I think with Donnie Darko, it's over the years, 20-some years, it's been talked about and written about and has become one of those movies that seemed crazy at the time it came out and confusing, but people have gone back to and rewatched it and they're getting more and more out of it. And it's to me like definitively when I think of like the word cult, or cult classic.
I couldn't agree more with you on the cult classic aspect of this film. Donnie Darko embodies exactly what that means. And that is a film that came out and didn't do well. And the people involved did not come out with a wad of cash. No one that made this movie came out really like, oh yeah, this is incredible. When this movie was released, it just tanked. But it came from a very ambitious mind, and that is Richard Kelly. At 22, had just graduated from USC Cinematic Arts in LA. He'd made a couple short films, The Goodbye Place, and one movie that ended up being pretty important for making connections that was called Visceral Matter, another short film of his. And he partnered up with Sean McKittrick, who was the producer of that and would later go on to produce Donnie Darko. As they both said at the time, they were broke film school grads. They were just trying to get jobs, get their toe in the door, and I mean, what everybody does after film school. It was also in Visceral Matter where Kelly met Sam Bauer, who would be the editor for that and also the future editor of Donnie Darko. After college, Kelly got a job at a post-production company as a gopher, doing the small, menial tasks, but he did have access to Avid editing software, so he would sneak up at night and work on some projects, or at least have the option to use the equipment when no one was around. And having this at his fingertips, this is when he decided, what am I doing? I'm working in the film world, I need to write my first feature. And I do think that he was overly ambitious at the time. He thought his first feature, he wasn't going to accept anything that was subpar. He was like shooting for the stars. And what a way to do it. If you're going to, why not shoot big? But that was his goal. He was going to use his own life influences, his love of science fiction growing up. He also had a father who was a literal rocket scientist. So the kind of time travel science aspect, you can see where that just kind of surrounded Richard Kelly in his youth growing up. He also grew up in the 80s, so he had that nostalgia that was following him. And all of these real-life influences that are littered throughout Donnie Darko as what he used to fuel writing this script. At the same time he was writing this, his old friend, producer Sean McKittrick, started working as an assistant at New Line. And this would be their first kind of big step into getting in more than just a toe in the door.
And yeah, what a great connection to have your buddies getting a job at New Line Cinema in the late 90s, which at that time had gotten to be pretty big and also was known to, take chances on smaller movies and give them like big theatrical releases.
Yeah, it really was kind of a huge break. And throughout all of the interviews that I've heard with Richard Kelly, whether it was around the time of Donnie Darko's release or now, one thing that has kind of stood out to me is that not all, but some of the film guys that I went to school with were walking around with a chip on their shoulder. Like they were kind of the same. Like, I'm going to shoot for the stars. This is going to be the greatest movie since Citizen Kane, like that type of thing. It's just not feasible. I haven't gotten the drift yet, and maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't know Richard Kelly. So far in all of this, he hasn't really rubbed me the wrong way in that he's really full of himself. It seems like the story of Donnie Darko, he really tried to pull from his own life, which that was one of the things you said in the beginning of this episode, Justin. One of the first things you're supposed to do as a filmmaker is pull from your own life, write what you know. And so even though one can look at Donnie Darko and think it's pretentious, especially the director's cut, I don't think that he comes off that way. And when he talks about this, I don't know if you have a different opinion on that.
I think that listening to interviews with him, especially the later interviews, because Richard Kelly did go on to make 2 other feature films, both of which were just like critically panned and like were box office duds. And so when you listen to him in the later years, I mean, he definitely sounds like a humbled filmmaker. But even on the commentary for the Donnie Darko disc, which was recorded not too long after the movie came out, he just sounds like a very enthusiastic filmmaker that was like super pumped about a movie that they made, not so much worried about how it was like perceived by audiences or critics alike.
Yeah, I've just got to give that a little bit of respect. When you're trying to write a movie like Donnie Darko that is out of left field, you can come off a certain way, but I don't think Kelly does.
Yeah, I think he comes off like fairly straightforward and doesn't seem to be like an egomaniac.
Yeah. And learning that he had a rocket scientist for a father like made so many pieces click for me in this. But in writing this story, I don't know if he is pulling everybody's leg as a marketing tool or not, but he said that writing the script for Donnie Darko, he wrote it in 28 days, exactly 28 days. And if you know this movie, you know that it takes place over the course of 28 days. He did write it in October, which was a direct influence on the script. Halloween was an influence on the script. Some people think of this as a Halloween movie, but I don't know about you. Do you, Justin? I don't really.
I honestly have never thought of it as a Halloween movie. And even watching it now after reading, this is a movie that people, I mean, it takes place in October, but it doesn't feel, the season of October or Halloween in general doesn't feel to be a big portion of the movie at all.
And I'm honestly thankful for that. Kelly did pull from a real life, like kind of urban legend story that he heard about a large piece of ice that fell from a plane and crashed into a boy's room. I tried to research this and see if I could find the actual story, but I did not have any luck. He considered at the time using the ice idea, but abandoned that. Growing up with a science background, he did use a book I will never read and will never challenge myself to read, which is Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, which is all over this film. Another thing, too, is John Hughes films. You can see that influence on this, certainly not the comedic aspect, but the way in which the filmmaker and writer is relating to teenagers and showing them as people and with feelings, like deep emotions. He is definitely taking that from John Hughes, but making it his own, especially with the kind of overall theme of challenging the establishment and conformity.
Yeah, I definitely feel the John Hughes influence in Donnie Darko, specifically to the way the adults are portrayed, made to look more like idiots compared to the teenagers. Like the teenagers are the smart ones that are introspective, as well as the soundtrack. It's very that true. New wave, 80s new wave that John Hughes pulled from a lot. To be honest, even though Donnie Darko is a period piece and takes place in the 80s, it feels more nostalgia based. It feels very much like a 90s movie to me.
It does.
Even the way that it looks, I know it doesn't feel like 80s, even though that is the time period.
I agree with that, but it doesn't take me out of the time either. And Kelly didn't want the movie to look like this is the 80s, like hairstyles. And I think Donnie is holding a Rubik's Cube in one scene, but there's not really anything stamped on it that's this is the 80s, which I like. It makes it a little bit more timeless. Another backdrop is the late 80s kind of political culture of the Reagan era, but in no way do I feel that there's any type of politics or any subtext that's throughout this movie. It's more just setting the scene and making you aware of the world in which you're in. But even though Kelly was younger than what Donnie Darko is here in 1988, his personality really influenced the character. He grew up in a suburban town. He did struggle with sleepwalking and even more like exact things like grandma death that we see in Donnie Darko. There was a woman that would always stand by her mailbox, keep opening and closing it and waving at people that went by. Probably the biggest thing that I've heard him talk about is the lifeline fear and love exercise that is kind of a big part of the film. That was something that was in his school curriculum. I think when you take actual events that happen from your life, that's why it feels so honest and it sucks you into the world. Even down to specific things like the word fuck ass in the beginning. No one who uses that, not even in the 80s. It wasn't something that's used then or now, but that was something that two film school friends of his said. Those personal touches add to the overall realness of the story. And in a science fiction story, you need something to make it feel grounded.
I also, too, the way he interjects the sort of sliding door aspect of Donnie Darko, which I think we all probably at one time or another, you think about like the different parallel timelines your life could take. I think especially once we get into our late 20s, you think about, well, if I would have went to this school and moved to this state, or if I would have went on this road trip and this, all these different parallels that your life could go of like, because I was late to school and I drank this cup of water, I survived, because if I would have like been on time, I could have been hit by a car on the way to school. Just you start thinking about all these like parallels. And I think Donnie Darko does a good job of like tapping into that idealism of, these what ifs, what if I would have done this when I was younger? Would it affect me now? And, that exists, we do our lives, every choice we make, does it start splintering and fracturing? And the idea that there's these parallel timelines that we're living these other lives, even subconsciously, I think Donnie Darko plays with that idea a little bit, more so in this time travel, different parallel timelines, where I think the movie does get a little bit confusing. And, on multiple viewings, I do find little bits that connect the dots that I didn't see on the first couple viewings of Donnie Darko.
And that idea of what if, what would have happened, that honestly didn't hit me the first time when I watched the movie. It was only in subsequent viewings that I got that aspect from it, because I wasn't thinking that this was a movie about time travel or a parallel universe, or even that Donnie was a superhero. And it's things like that where I know, like what you said, sometimes it's a fault of a film to say, I didn't get something and I needed to watch it a couple times. I think that you extrapolate a lot more from Donnie Darko, but it just makes it richer in a way. But to me, it doesn't feel like a fault. It just means that there's so much packed into this universe that there's a lot of the onion to unpeel.
And I do think that through all of the symbolism and confusion of the script, Richard Kelly does add old Hollywood tropes and storytelling tropes that people can relate to, that people appreciate, that people long for, and that's someone who's sacrificing themselves for the better of others. In the history of time and the history of storytelling and movies, we always can appreciate, we can sympathize with a martyr. And Donnie Darko, I think, is that. By the end of the movie, we see him as this martyr, as this person who sacrificed himself to save the world in one of these various strange timelines that Richard Kelly sets up in the script.
And when you're talking about a story that has more than one universe and time travel and being the central character that saves your entire community and the world. How are you going to pare that down to a decently sized script and not a 1,000-page novel? The initial script was about 160 pages, and Richard Kelly pared that down with Sean McKittrick, who did sign on as producer, pared that down to about 130 pages after a couple rewrites. These two team up and immediately go to New Line and McKittrick's connections there. This was about 1999. The meeting with New Line doesn't go so well. That doesn't stop them from trying to shop the script, but every single meeting is ending in rejection, with the same note from every production company saying that this film is completely unproducible. And really, no one wanted to take a chance on such an involved story with a first-time director and, first feature writer, especially when Richard Kelly was completely unbendable about directing the film. I do wonder if he had decided he wasn't going to direct it and just be the writer, if it would have gotten produced faster. But I have to admire the guy for saying, I'm going to direct this, it's my vision.
Donnie Darko would have been made on the much bigger scale with like some well-known director, not the smaller personal film that Richard Kelly made by sticking to his guns and being the director himself.
But I could totally see a movie like this, the original writer being totally pissed about what they would do to the script. I mean, it would be ripped apart. But even though Kelly and McKittrick were getting rejected, there was a little glimmer of hope when Creative Artists Agency comes out of nowhere, really, and I guess hears about this script and hears about Richard Kelly and offers to represent him. This kind of gives new wind to hopefully selling Donnie Darko and also legitimizes Kelly a little bit as a writer and director. And through CAA, he gets a couple meetings with the likes of Francis Ford Coppola, Ben Stiller, a couple other directors. And this is, I mean, you're getting up there if you're having these meetings, even if you're getting rejected. Now, you would think with as many meetings that they're having, there would be someone that was biting. There wasn't really a company that was coming out of nowhere, but they did think about casting. I guess as this script was making its way around LA, there was a little bit of word of mouth getting out about this complicated, interesting script that people thought was unproducible. So they started thinking about casting even without a production company behind it. Vince Vaughn was offered the role, which I can't even imagine. He's too old for the part, and I think it ultimately was why he turned it down. Mark Wahlberg was offered it, but it wouldn't be until 2000 when, again, out of nowhere, this whole Donnie Darko alternate universe reality, just someone comes out of nowhere and offers themselves up, is Jason Schwartzman, who was fresh off of Rushmore and totally someone that you wanted to be in your movie, especially then. He agrees to play Donnie Darko, and with him signed on, Kelly is full on thinking, okay, we're going to make this film, it's going to happen.
And it's here that Richard Kelly tells a really great story of, through the connection of Schwartzman being interested, Jason Schwartzman's uncle being Francis Ford Coppola, meets with Richard Kelly, and Richard Kelly kind of tells this very dramatic story of Coppola like sliding the Donnie Darko script across the table and saying, a particular scene struck him about what Drew Barrymore says about how kids these days are lost, and Coppola was like, that's what your movie's about. That had to give Richard Kelly some confidence of someone like Coppola, who had made arguably some of the greatest films ever made, sitting across the table from you and saying like, you got a solid script here, this is interesting. And that probably helped along the way, Schwartzman plus all these people being interested in your script, even if they don't have confidence in you as a director. They're like, this is a good story. This is interesting. This needs to get made.
And it's not often that you have an actor that signs on and then that's what gets you the project. But that is what happened in this case with Jason Schwartzman signing on. Pandora Cinema came out of the woodwork along with many other actors offering their services. Pandora offers $2.5 million to produce the film. And then Jason Schwartzman's agent, Sharon Scheinwald, sends the script over to Nancy Javonin of Flower Films, who co-owned that with Drew Barrymore. She shows it to Drew. Now at this point, Flower Films had only produced Never Been Kissed and Charlie's Angels. I mean, nothing to sneeze at. Those movies were giant successes, but they had only produced 2 films. Luckily, these 2 women loved Donnie Darko. They wanted to be involved, and by March 2000, they had a meeting with Kelly and McKittrick. Drew Barrymore wants to play Karen, and they were also super excited about working with Jason Schwartzman. Again, bringing it back to the old Schwartzman, man. He was bringing people together for this, and coming off of Rushmore was just making people come out of the woodwork for it. So Flower Films agrees to add $2 million to the budget, bringing everything to $4.5 million for Donnie Darko. Kelly, I mean, it's a little bit of a audacity to say it was the bare minimum for this production, but I mean, dude, you got $4.5 million to make this movie. That's something. And that's ultimately what the budget was for the film. With Flower Films and Pandora involved, this gave the film everything it needed. Of course, needed to figure out the cast and everything, but it's important to also know it was at this point when Kelly signs over his ownership of Donnie Darko. Just something to keep in mind for a, first-time feature film director and writer. So filming is scheduled for the summer of 2000 to accommodate Drew Barrymore's schedule. She could only shoot for a week, which didn't really seem like a big deal. This movie was scheduled for just about a month for production. But with the summer of 2000 approaching, by July, Jason Schwartzman withdraws from the production for whatever reason was behind it. Now, while this could be a devastating blow, and it kind of was, Drew Barrymore calls Kelly and says, "Don't worry about Jason leaving. We're going to make this, and we're going to find another Donnie." Kelly was very heartened to get that, and also minorly excited about the idea of recasting Donnie. There had been a lot of interest from actors like Lucas Black, Patrick Fugit, but this was where we had Jake Gyllenhaal enter the picture. He had gotten the script and happened to be auditioning in LA at the time and said he was so captivated by it. You never know if these stories are true or not, but was so captivated by it that he had to pull his car over and finish reading the rest of the script where he had started. Jake shows up to his audition, and Kelly said from the moment that he spoke, they knew that he was going to be Donnie. Kelly had 1 month to work with him, adapt Donnie's dialogue to the way that Jake spoke, and Jake was really encouraged to throw in his own ideas, including the kind of childlike voice that Donnie does when he is hypnotized, especially when he's talking about Frank, and it's a really endearing voice that is kind of cool to know that Jake Gyllenhaal came up with that and that wasn't worked into the script. I like that idea. So with Jake Gyllenhaal aboard, we've got our Donnie, and it's time to move forward. Before we can get to filming, we need a director of photography, and Richard Kelly had his sights on someone who had to be seasoned. He needed a professional for this. He was able to get the script to cinematographer Stephen Poster, who had done Close Encounters, Blade Runner, pretty big films that had a memorable quality to them visually. And with Poster falling in love with the script, Kelly thought he was really lucky that Poster was even interested. He did have to persuade him to work for a reduced fee. Poster hadn't worked in a couple years, but Poster was excited about the idea of working on a film that gave him the opportunity to work a little bit more intuitively and with someone who had a very clear vision. Kelly was concerned about working with someone who had been in the business for many, many years past him, about being steamrolled on directing, but Poster kind of already knew that, put his fears at ease, and had him dissect the entire script for him and explain why each scene was necessary, and they really went to town on the vision for this story. And that's one of the things that everyone who talks about this film says, that there was always a clear vision of what it was to look like visually, and if you have that harmony between a writer-director and a DP, I think that is always going to come through very strong visually in the film. And Donnie Darko, one of the most memorable things about the film is how it looks.
Yeah, it's very rare that you hear about a first-time filmmaker getting a cinematographer like Stephen Poster to shoot your very first feature film. Kind of amazing that he was able to not only get someone of that caliber interested, but that they had a very collaborative experience. And then also, like you said, Stephen Poster sort of pushing aside Kelly's fears of, I have all this experience and I'm so much older than you, I'm going to take over your movie. but instead had a very open mind and really wanted to discuss the film and find out what Kelly wanted. It's a very dark film, in my opinion. Like, just watching it on my TV, with the lights on, there's some scenes that are almost hard to see, but it looks very purposeful in the same way, we talked about with the Godfather episode. They just let some parts of the frame almost go completely black, where parts of people's faces are even dark, along the forehead. But it does go with the sort of like mysterious element of this movie and the fogginess of Donnie Darko's character, and dreamlike sequences that seem to happen, I think, do feel in a lot of ways like how when we dream, not everything is totally clear, where we only can think of certain little elements of our dreams. And a lot of Donnie Darko feels that way. So I think it fits, even though sometimes when I'm watching, I'm a little frustrated. I was like, I can't see anything.
Another thing that Poster was able to do, he had a lot of connections at Panavision and was able to get an unprecedented amount of filming equipment at a reduced price, which really made the studio happy. So not only are you getting a seasoned pro, but you're also like getting a discount on some equipment, which anything was going to help this production because Kelly really needed it for his ultimate vision.
And it seems like every step of the way, Donnie Darko was overly ambitious. Shooting 28 days on a movie like this with so many shots and so many special effects, visual effects mixed in, seems very daunting. But from everything that I've read, it seems like there were really very few hiccups along the way for production. I think one of the main issues that Kelly had was just that some of the scenes he wanted to be bigger, like the jet engine following. He wanted this big, gigantic, Industrial Lights Magic version of it. But due to budget restraints, they had to like condense things, and things came off a little bit smaller than he had hoped. But overall, again, like you said, this is a very visual film. It's been known for that, specifically, the shot with the head over heels, camera tilting and showing visually all the characters in the film that are inside the school and establishing the school all in this one music video-esque shots. That scene particular, that shot is, I think, the most memorable of the movie, and also like is the shot that says, "Hello, I'm Richard Kelly. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm taking, this is my big money shot for the movie." And yes, does it seem a little overindulgent? Of course, but so does every big shot that Scorsese's done or Paul Thomas Anderson. We talk about them because they are awesome. And yeah, they take me out of the movie a little bit? Sure. Do I appreciate them for what they are? Absolutely.
I love that shot, not only for like how visually compelling it is and having it in slow motion in some parts and then speeding up the film in other parts during the same sequence, but it introduces us to everyone, and through nonverbal cues and interactions, side-eye moments, we get so much about so many characters in this world of Donnie Darko and everyone that's around him. That shot is so important for the overall film.
Richard Kelly said he was lucky to find someone to help him with visual effects, because there are a few moments in this movie that needed some sci-fi special effects elements, specifically the strange, it reminded me of The Abyss, that weird, or Terminator 2, that like kind of like liquidy snake that comes out of the characters' chests, and also Frank the rabbit. I don't know if they intended for him to be so terrifying looking, but there's moments where between his voice, the silhouettes, and how dark the movie is, mixed with the creepiness of that mask, it teeters on a horror film at times. He
was supposed to be disturbing and animalistic, and there was a little bit of confusion. Like, is he supposed to be scary? And it leads you to think, well, I guess this giant bunny rabbit that's kind of bothersome to look at as the villain, but Frank is totally not. He's not the evil character in the film. And that voice that you're talking about, it goes with the kind of ongoing theme throughout the movie is this kind of liquid, deep water, underwater aspect that we see in the spears that are coming out of people's chests. This idea of predestination, or what these liquid spears are supposed to be showing us. And even the water mirror barrier, when Donnie's communicating with Frank through the mirror and hitting it, and it has this liquid kickback.
Well, with budget constraints and a short filming schedule, so many elements bring to life this world that Richard Kelly created, but I don't think anything as much as the actors themselves, who I'm sure at times maybe didn't understand even the world that they were acting within, but put faith in Kelly to delve into these characters the best they could to create the world of Donnie Darko. So let's take a break. We'll go to another clip, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the cast and characters of Donnie Darko.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How much are they paying you to be here?
Excuse me? What is your name, son?
Gerald.
Well, Gerald, I think you're afraid.
Are you telling us this stuff so we can buy your book? Because I gotta tell you, if you are, that was some of the worst advice I ever heard.
You see how sad this is?
I want your sister to lose weight, tell her to get off the couch, stop eating Twinkies, and maybe go out for field hockey. You know what? No one ever knows what they want to be when they grow up. You know, it takes a little while to find that out, right, Jim? And you. Yeah, you. You're sick of some jerk shoving your head down the toilet. Well, you know what? Maybe you should lift some weights or take a karate lesson, and the next time he tries to do it, you kick him in the balls.
Son, do you see this?
Right.
This is an anger prisoner, a textbook example.
Prisoner.
Do you see the fear, people? This boy is scared to death of the truth. Son, it breaks my heart to say this, but I believe you are a very troubled and confused young man. I believe you are searching for the answers in all the wrong places.
You're right, actually. I am. I'm pretty troubled and I'm pretty confused, but I'm afraid, really afraid. Really afraid, but I think you're fucking Antichrist.
For a first-time director, Richard Kelly had luck on his side, and casting was one of those beautiful things for this film, from an impressive grouping of seasoned professionals to up-and-coming new actors, people that had been around but not really meaty roles like in this film. And because the budget was relatively meager, especially for such a big cast, such a big ensemble cast, everyone, for the most part, was working for scale in this. And I don't know if it's impressive to just me, but because of the shooting schedule, they did block shooting for this time. They had a month to shoot, so they shot multiple scenes using one location. So every time that you see the Darkos around the dinner table throughout the film, all of those scenes were shot in one span of time when shooting those scenes. The therapist office, the same thing. Drew Barrymore's scenes at the school. All of these scenes that are scattered throughout the film, they're all shot together at one time. And to me, being able to evoke various different reactions throughout a 2-hour movie and not be obvious throughout the film, that's pretty impressive.
And quite challenging for the lead actor, because he's having to react to all the coverage that they have to get on these other actors, especially since they're trying to cram in, like you said, all the dinner scenes in one location in 1 day or 2 days. And effective to get the movie shot so quickly, but exhausting, I'm sure, for the actors. And like you said, trying to balance that emotion of like, this happened on this day and this happened on that day, even though we're shooting them just a few hours apart.
And for a film that is so cerebral and going through various different emotions throughout the film, being able to evoke that throughout the entire cast and everyone be that centered, well, it's pretty cool. I haven't heard that many stories of block shooting happening where the film is as emotionally involved as Donnie Darko is.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of like shooting in sequence,
Yeah.
you know, as the movie progresses to make it easier on the actors, but this certainly seems like it would make it harder. But like you said, with a cast like this, it was very seasoned. I'm sure it was no issue for them, specifically the lead star, Jake Gyllenhaal, who at the top of the episode I mentioned I was not sold on Gyllenhaal like by the few movies that I had seen, but I've really grown to love him as an actor, and going back and watching him and Donnie Darko has been a real treat, especially seeing the range in which he has to bring to this character, because there's so much of the movie where he's like not talking, sleepwalking, and reacting to things that we as an audience see as just total bizarre weirdness. And so we're having to look at his character to kind of like make sense of things and how he reacts to things, whether it be confusion or scared shitless. A lot of that is on his shoulders as far as like how the movie's going to play out. And he does an admirable job with, I think, a script that probably was like kind of hard to gauge on what he was supposed to be at certain times. Thankfully, you have the writer who made the movie right there to talk to him, that he can direct you in how to make these characters make sense at least a little bit.
And everyone, including Gyllenhaal, said that Kelly was always open to suggestions from actors. And then when you have a writer-director who is willing for you to work with the dialogue, and some scenes were ad-libbed. When you have a writer-director like that, I think it makes for a much more freeing experience, and I want to believe in an easier time of shooting, too.
And as open as Richard Kelly was to actor suggestions, I can't help but bring up a funny incident that he mentioned where one of the possible casting decisions for the role of Donnie Darko was Mark Wahlberg, who at first they were excited about, but then Mark Wahlberg said that he would only do it if he could play the Donnie Darko character with a lisp, which Richard Kelly was like, I don't understand. That's just, we're not going to do that. So he moved on to somebody else. So not always is it a great idea from actors, but, they go into different, they're trying to get their take on the character. And so I get why actors will say, I want to bring something to this character to make them more tangible to me and more concrete. And Jake Gyllenhaal does just such a great job, because it's hard to get like a read on him at first, because he is very rebellious and he like lashes out on people, but then at the same time he has a sentimental side to him, especially with the scenes with Jenna Malone. It makes his character more mysterious, not really knowing where he's coming from. But toward the end of the movie, you do get a sense that he has this kind of doomsday attitude and, realizing like, I have to do something to save humanity and I'll sacrifice myself by getting squished by a airplane engine.
Thankfully, that part was cut out of the film.
Yes.
It's pretty graphic. No one wants to see that. I love Jake's performance in this. He has the ability to suck me in, at least, and not make me think that Donnie knows everything from the beginning, but I'm figuring it out along with Donnie. He's a few steps ahead of me, and as soon as I catch up to where he is, it kind of all falls into place, and his mood swings make more sense to me. Gyllenhaal does have the ability to kind of switch from this boyish quality to somewhat, I don't want to say menacing, but Donnie's dark and brooding, and to be able to switch from one to the other takes a certain finesse. And I think the most obvious is when he's talking to Frank, or when he's sleepwalking and he looks a little possessed almost. And then other moments where Jake is showing the true empathy and warmness that does exist within Donnie. There's a lot of conflict that's going on within his character, but Gyllenhaal does such a good job of showing how complex that character is, that the more, I don't want to say sentimental moments, but the moments that stick out to me are the ones where Donnie is showing his softness or showing his vulnerability, especially when he's also at the same time talking to a 6-foot-tall bunny rabbit.
And I think, too, you ride a fine line when you make a character lash out at other characters, like when he's ripping on Patrick Swayze's character, he's like ripping on his own mother or his therapist. We get the sense like, okay, this character is like really intelligent and really introspective, but you can lose an audience easily if you make them so spiteful to other characters that you're like, well, I don't care if he's the smartest person in the room. This guy's an asshole. So Gyllenhaal really, I think, does like capture the essence of a character who is troubled, but you're willing to shed a little bit of sympathy for him.
I'm glad you bring up that scene, because when he's challenging Patrick Swayze's Jim Cunningham character, the line that he says, you're right, I am pretty confused and I am pretty troubled, but I think you're the fucking Antichrist. The way that he delivers that line is showing that vulnerability that I'm talking about, but also showing how he's challenging the system, which is another kind of theme throughout the film. We see it in Drew Barrymore's character of Karen Pomeroy, even in Donnie's mom, Rose Darko, we see that in her too. And I think being able to communicate that vulnerability and directness is something that Jake Gyllenhaal does an exceptional job at in this movie. I could watch him. I mean, he's all throughout the movie, but I never get tired of watching him.
And the family in this is so well cast. This was a moment in I think films where, late 90s, early 2000s, where we were getting a lot of movies about the cracks in the suburban structure, family structure, where, they have money, they're well off, the parents go to work, do their jobs, they're not drug addicts or alcoholics, but yet you see all these cracks in the family structure. And it's evident in this movie, but it's not in a way where it's like beating you over the head with it. They do have a few moments where they're at the dinner table and you can see the disassociation between the mom and dad and the kids. And that happens in every family, and we've seen it in countless movies, but I think it's done in a way in this movie really gently. Using Maggie Gyllenhaal, Jake Gyllenhaal's real sister, was a clever way to, I think, immediately get a sense of like, oh, not only do these two actors look alike, they react like brother and sister. And even though Maggie Gyllenhaal hadn't really been in anything and has gone on to do so many wonderful roles, she's used sparsely here, but like we really get a sense of a real family dynamic in this movie from the get-go. I mean, within the first like 10 minutes of the movie.
And to hear that she tried to talk Kelly out of hiring her, I want to know why. What was your reasoning for that? Because it was too close to home or something like that? But at the end of the film, when his dead body's being wheeled off, her reaction, like for me, like it is immediate tears because one, I mean, as a viewer, you know that that's his real life sister. And that is some like, it almost feels like it's not even acting, how legit her performance is. And in the sibling dynamic, I mean, how could you want for anything more than two kids who came from the same family and siblings? It's perfect casting. I do wish some of her scenes hadn't gotten cut, but for the kind of underwritten role that she has in the movie, Maggie does a great job with it.
And earlier we mentioned the influence of John Hughes movies. We do see that with the adults in this movie. They're shown as inferior to the kids in the movie. They seem like they're trying to force some agenda on the younger generation, and you see that pushback. But I do like the way that the parents are played in Donnie Darko. The mom and dad seem like a marriage that's been settled for a long time, where they're kind of both in their own worlds, and they've just kind of given up on any sort of set parenting style. These moments where they're at the dinner table feel very real. I feel like I've seen years of them sitting at this table and interacting with each other, and it feels very alive for like a moment like this. We a lot of times don't see in movies. We don't see that family dynamic so quickly.
I think that both Rose Darko, played by Mary McDonnell, and Eddie, played by Holmes Osborne, do feel like they've been married for a long time, but they don't feel like they're estranged necessarily from each other. And that they're having, the movie opens on a political discussion, debate. If anything, it felt like a healthy interaction and kind of an unusual interaction. But then again, both Elizabeth and Donnie are kind of older. But I don't know. I like the interaction with the parents. I mean, I think if anything, if any kid gets lost in this, it's definitely that of Samantha, played by DeVay Chase. She comes into play a little bit later, but I don't know. I like their family dynamic. I do think that Mary McDonnell's character is trying to guide Donnie in some sort of way, where Eddie's more kind of hands off of Donnie and kind of wants him to just do what he's going to do, boys will be boys type of thing. But Rose wants better for Donnie, and she genuinely cares about him. And her scenes in which she's talking to Donnie's therapist are some of the most emotionally gutting scenes. And even with her interaction of obviously trying to be closer to her son, where he says, how does it feel to have a wacko for a son, and she says, "It feels wonderful." Like her, like also choking back tears in that scene. It's just the way that she plays this, it is very obvious that she understood the emotional undercurrent of each scene.
And I wanted to move on to the school setting, because I feel like this movie has like almost like 3 stages, where there's Donnie Darko and his dream sequence, time traveling self, and then we have the family dynamic, and then we have the school setting, which is a majority of the movie, and I think really does a really great job of showing. It feels very authentic to me, this sort of private school setting and the teacher dynamic and how structured things are. Like there's pressure coming down on the students. You know, there's such a pressure for teachers to perform in a specific matter so that they don't get the administration mad, they don't get the parents mad. And I don't think the movie dwells on that too long, but we do get like little notes of that throughout the movie, specifically with the Drew Barrymore character and the Noah Wyle character. And Drew Barrymore here, you know, she was the first person to, I think, get cast in the movie, and also is on board as a producer. It really seems like a really small role for her at this point in her career, but I think does a really good job of showing a teacher who is like still young enough to want to entice students, but also at the same time is careful to not question the administration. And so we see a few scenes where she's trying to connect with the students, like challenging students, maybe saying that things aren't what they appear, like there's a darkness going on. Like usually it seems like teachers are meant to keep things light for students. And there's a couple of discussions that happen in the classroom that I found refreshing for a high school type movie versus what we had seen in the 80s and early 90s.
Drew's Karen Pomeroy character, I really love her. I wish there was more of her in the film, because the connection that she has with Donnie is very obvious. She recognizes him as someone that is exceptional, someone that's paying attention, someone that gets what she's trying to teach, while she also sees so many disaffected youths fall by the wayside. Along with that, in the kind of like overall mythology of this film, she is in this alternate universe that we're in, a guide to Donnie. She's guiding him towards his ultimate goal by the end of the film. And it's something I think on a rewatch you can see. She's someone that supports him and believes in his intelligence. And I feel like in some ways she wishes more of her students were like Donnie. And she probably identifies with Donnie in some ways because she is kind of pushing the system a little bit. She is having her students think outside of the box, or at least she's trying to get them, which is ultimately the reason why she's fired. And even in that scene, trying to explain why she is the way she is as a teacher, the principal, the man, whatever you want to say, is immediately not wanting to hear it. This is playing into that kind of overall theme of the movie of the way that things are working are not how they should be. There's this teacher that's trying to make a difference, but then the system is just saying, fall in line, and we don't want to hear what you have to say. I think Drew's performance in this film, I mean, I love her in pretty much everything. I am very emotionally affected after she's fired and, you know, angrily walks out of school and screams fuck really loud. I love that part. And she turns around and sees Sharita, who's like the number one bullied kid in school. Like that moment that they share. I mean, as someone who was bullied in high school, like I am affected by that part. And it's again, nonverbal. It's just a beautiful sharing of a moment. If you've been either one of these people who are challenging the system or bullied, you know that they are sharing a moment.
And the other teacher in Donnie Darko's life, played by Noah Wyle, is almost like he's like the positive energy of this movie, which I always feel like he kind of brings to every role. You know, he has this demeanor that's always it's like very chipper and pleasant, and immediately interested in helping Donnie Darko out when Donnie starts asking questions about time travel. And instead of sort of rolling his eyes or like saying, you know, I'm too busy, he like takes a moment to kind of explain possible parallel universes. His character is that moment for the audience to kind of like let us take a moment to have something explained to us, because for a while now we've been watching a movie and just kind of digesting it, not really knowing what's going on. We're sort of been in this like wave of confusion. And so he, in some ways, I think, lightens the tone of the movie, but also like gives us a little bit of an explanation that's not, it doesn't stop the movie dead in its tracks and say, okay, here's what the movie's about, but it gives us a little bit of guidance on this is science-based. There's the potential of this to be a reality of the universe that we're watching.
And by the same token, he's willing to talk about that. But when Donnie is not necessarily disproving him, but kind of in a way of talking about science and religion and the idea of God and predestination, he stops the conversation. And in that sense, is being controlled by the school and what he as a teacher is allowed to talk about and what he's not. But the thing that's wonderful about that is that he's upfront about it and saying, if I continue this conversation, I could lose my job, which makes him another positive influence in Donnie's life, another guide. And with Noah Wiley's character cutting off the conversation, Donnie's not upset by it. He realizes he's hit on something. And Professor Monatoff has also given him the Philosophy of Time Travel book by Roberta Sparrow, a.k.a. Grandma Death. This is a pivotal moment in the movie in which Donnie, his world's kind of exploding right now as he's really realizing that he is in some kind of tangential universe.
And yet really breaks up the administration here with the teachers, because we do have the helpers and then we have the characters that are sort of villainized, the Patrick Swayze character and Mrs. Farmer.
And Mrs. Farmer, played by Beth Grant, when this actor plays a role like this in film, she's always so grating on me, but it's because she's playing the character really well. Mrs. Farmer is obviously scared underneath her veneer. She's clinging on to this horrible kind of like infomercial motivational speaker that is Jim Cunningham, that's complete bullshit. But underneath that veneer is I believe that she has a good heart, but her dismount is just not very good. She is a good person, but speaks really crappily to people, puts them down, but her heart is in the right spot. I'm not trying to explain her away, but I do feel like by the end of the film, we get a glimpse of Mrs. Farmer having a thought beyond what she's so caught up in with Patrick Swayze's Jim Cunningham. Again, this is after we have gone through this tangential universe, and we have the iconic montage at the end of the film, but we see the realization on Kitty's face that what's this residual memory from this tangential world, that she knows that something deep within her, that something is wrong, that she herself is probably going down the path of fear in this whole fear and love lifeline exercise that she tries to force down the throats of her students.
Well, and I think, too, her character is Richard Kelly tapping into a little bit of like sort of like a religious self-righteousness that her character portrays so well, where it's like she's following a certain path and feels like everyone else should be on the same sort of moral plane that she is. But time and time again, she's offering backhanded compliments. She's judging, puts all of her trust and faith into the Patrick Swayze character, who we eventually find out is a total sham. But even when that is revealed, she's come so far down this path, she doesn't want to look back. And I think Richard Kelly is kind of touching a little bit on organized religion and how, some people can believe in one thing and go down the path for so long that, like, even if something's not right, they're not going to question it, because they're like, I've already put everything, I've invested all this time and energy and faith, I can't start fresh. And I think that's her character, like, emphasizes that really, especially toward the end of the film.
And one of the most uncomfortably ironic things about her character is that while she's the coach for the school adolescent girl dance troupe of Sparkle Motion, she's kind of exploiting children and living through them, putting these girls on display. And at the same time, she's putting on a pedestal who she doesn't know is a pedophile, this Jim Cunningham character. When that aspect is exposed, and knowing that she is, in essence, she's kind of fueling that. That's also a direct comment on what we do to adolescents, putting them on display, taking them for granted. And it's never not going to be shocking for me every time that that aspect is exposed in this movie.
And the Jim Cunningham character, who is exposed as a child predator, is not a role that a lot of people probably want to take part in. This is one of those roles that people don't really ever talk about with Patrick Swayze movies. You never really hear Donnie Darko come up. I mean, I know he doesn't have like a large role in the movie, and generally you think of Patrick Swayze being the star of a film, but I think he does a really unique role here that he hadn't done prior in his career, and plays a character who is from the outside seemingly perfect and has all the answers, but then underneath is this monster who's like a child molester.
I can't think of someone better for this role because the audience is never going to guess that he's a villain. And especially because his character doesn't come off like that. He might come off like a total chode, and his fear and love lifeline exercise like a infomercial, which is hilarious, by the way. I kind of want to watch the entire infomercial. Patrick Swayze, who did frost his hair for this role, also used his own wardrobe for this. Again, trying to skate by on having a smaller budget, but his smarmy, like mid-80s flashy clothing, I think, is the unspoken indicator that he's a shyster. He's selling snake oil. He's a liar. He's deceptive. And it's something that you wouldn't expect from Patrick Swayze. And like you said, we don't see him play a role like this. For the moments that we do have him on screen, it is almost unsettling to see Patrick Swayze play an unsavory character, especially after you find out that he's most likely a child molester. It is as mind-blowing for me as it is for Maggie Gyllenhaal's character, who introduces us to that.
His character is a real callback to how prevalent these infomercial people were in the 80s. You know, when I was watching the movie, I was like, it hit me right away. I was like, oh yeah, I totally remember like as a kid watching infomercials, and you can see these infomercials like preying on people who are up real late at night and who are unhappy with their lives, or just want a quick and easy fix to money problems or social anxiety problems or spouse problems, and seeing some quick 30-minute guy, that looks flashy and talks fast and says, oh, all you have to do is buy my book or buy this or follow my 10-step plan, and knowing that it's not going to be that easy, but at 3:00 in the morning and you're looking for some sort of sign. His character, preys upon that audience. You see someone that looks so happy, but you don't see how sinister those people can be. And I don't think that Donnie Darko delves too heavily into that. I mean, we do, it is revealed that he has all this child pornography, but we don't really see much more of his character, and we don't really see him too much outside of giving his speeches to kids in the school. It is interesting that Swayze chose to take on a smaller role. And even though at this point in his career, he wasn't doing as many successful movies like he did in the late 80s, early 90s, but still taking a very small role in a somewhat strange film. It was very reminiscent of like Tom Cruise doing Magnolia, where it's like this big marquee actor, maybe flexing their acting muscles and taking a riskier role. And I think it paid off in this. And again, I wish this was like a role that more people talked about with Swayze.
His character is one of the hardest, I think, for audiences, the hardest pill to swallow, because if Donnie's grand plan is to reset this universe, so his mother, his sister, his girlfriend, Frank, so these people don't die, to set things right, then that also means that Jim Cunningham having child pornography is never exposed. I think it's kind of difficult to reason with. You also have to remember that exposing Jim Cunningham was a byproduct of Donnie's grand plan. It wasn't part of the deal. It just happened. But to reference the final montage again, and we see him sitting on the side of his bed, crying, and for the 5 seconds that we see him crying, way to go, Patrick Swayze. I actually feel that you hate yourself because of who you are. I think that there is a little bit of hope left over, that this tangential world, that when everyone wakes up from this dream, they remember a little bit. but hoping that he at least wants to be a better person is a positive spin that you could put on this when you know that Jim Cunningham is never going to be brought to justice. Someone who is a positive guide and influence to Donnie throughout the film is his therapist, Dr. Lillian Thurman, played by Catherine Ross, who hadn't acted in quite a few years, but was, I would say, probably most well known from The Graduate and Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid. I don't know who got the script to her first or if she was just in mind from Richard Kelly, but when they met, I guess there was like a misunderstanding that Kelly thought he was going to have to beg her to be in the film, and he gets there for this meeting, and she loved the script so much when she realized that he was trying to persuade her to be in it. She's like, oh no, there's no persuading. I really want to do this film, because I'm more used to seeing her from 70s time. Seeing her in this role, her acting is just as superb as it always was, but she almost seems kind of different from what I remember in films growing up. Her relationship with Donnie is enlightening, and I think in a lot of scenes that were cut out, we see a lot more of that relationship, but in some ways, she's what helps Donnie connect dots and understand his subconscious, and also be able to communicate with someone when he can't really communicate with that many of his peers.
And also, I think those scenes with her and Donnie Darko serve as like a little bit of a window into Donnie's mind, that the first time we get a sense of like what he's feeling, what he feels safe saying to somebody is revealed versus like the other characters in the movie where, you know, at least with the Jenna Malone character, we see a little bit of sensitive side, but with everyone else, he seems to be like rebelling against. He kind of opens up a little bit in these scenes. And so it at least gives us a little bit of clarity on like where he's coming from. And though the students in the movie don't take up too much time, some notable performances, namely Jenna Malone, who is the love interest to Donnie Darko, it's nice because it gives us a little bit of time free from Donnie constantly being around all the adults and railing against everything. He kind of loosens up a little bit, and we see a more sensitive side to him in the scenes that he shares with her.
Richard Kelly said that Jenna Malone was an immediate choice to play opposite Jake Gyllenhaal, and they really do play well off of each other. The character of Gretchen is similar to Donnie in some ways. They're drawn to each other. There's similar kind of points of view of the world, and they want for a nicer world. Gretchen also lets us see a softer side of Donnie in a way. I mean, he still has his argumentative, not necessarily confrontational, but argumentative side, but she helps soften that. And he's even further motivated to change the world because of his love for her, to give her back life after she dies in this tangential world. In giving Donnie a love interest that is as emotionally hurt as she is, we learned a little bit about her backstory, not too much, enough to be equal with Donnie, just different stories on how they came together. Their scene where they first finally kiss is, I don't know about you, Justin, but it's a really wonderful moment that's unexpected, and her saying that she doesn't want to kiss him for the first time until it reminds her of how beautiful the world can be. I mean, no kid says that ever, but it's a nice notion in this movie.
Yeah, and we also find out too that she's carrying around a lot of darkness and trauma in her life, that she's dealing with it in a very real sense, whereas Donnie's is more like manifested from something else. It's not necessarily real in the first, at least, universe that he lives in, you know, until we start time jumping.
And their love or their feelings that they have for each other is nothing that's too complex. It's really innocent, very sweet. And I think that's why even more when Gretchen dies, that Donnie is so... it didn't really hit me until this last viewing that it feels like Donnie's almost kind of surprised, because he keeps, like when she gets hit, he still is kind of saying her name like, okay, wake up, wake up. It didn't really hit me until that moment that he knows in that moment what he has to do, especially when he sees that the person that hit her is the human in the Frank the Bunny costume. But the love that Donnie has for Gretchen isn't the only example, and this is on a much more minor scale is the character of Sharita. I feel like we have to do a shout out to Sharita. She is bullied in pretty much every scene that she's in, but in the way that the character of Donnie is related to her. In 3/4 of the way through the film, we find out that Sharita has this quiet crush on Donnie, and it's again another emotional part when Donnie kind of not aggressively, but she's wearing earmuffs and he grabs her and says, "I promise one day everything's going to be okay for you." And I mean, that's probably the first time anyone's ever spoken to Sharita in a real way that's recognizing what she has to go through. And for the boy that she has a crush on to be doing that is, I mean, mind-blowing. And so she runs away from him. Of course, this is understandable. But when Donnie sees that she's doodled his name on her notebook, instead of rejecting it, instead of making fun of her, he absorbs it and he wears her earmuffs home. It's these little moments where we see the empathy and care within Donnie that I think round out the overall picture and kind of soften the edges of when we see him lash out against things. That he is someone who's going through an ever-evolving changing of emotions, but it's also just showing that Donnie is kind of this roller coaster of emotions, but can identify care and love, and also see somebody that's hurt and in pain.
That's a really good point. Well, to round out the cast, we have Donnie's bullies played by Seth Rogen and Alex Greenwald, who do a very convincing job of your typical high school degenerates, prone to violence, prone to lashing out on Donnie. We don't really ever get a sense of like where they're coming from, but they just exist in this world of like constantly being scumbags to Donnie.
And I think we have to mention two other main characters before we close this out. Two probably the most important ones in Donnie's whole alternate universe parallel existence, that being Roberta Sparrow, aka Grandma Death, played by Patience Cleveland. Although she doesn't have any lines in this film, everything about what Donnie is going through is leading us to Grandma Death, literally leading us to her cellar door where Donnie and Gretchen are attacked by Alex Greenwald and Seth Rogen, which sets everything in motion. At this point, I think there's like 6 hours left before the end of the world. And if this action hadn't happened, then Donnie would have never been able to set the world right. Even though we don't get any dialogue from Roberta Sparrow, it is her philosophy of time travel, everything. She is an incredibly important part to this entire story. But Donnie's biggest guide in the film is Frank the Bunny, Frank Anderson, who is in the tangential universe. He is Elizabeth Darko's boyfriend, and in this kind of other existence, who Donnie is talking to is Frank the Bunny. I think it's a really common misconception that Frank is evil, and I mean, that bunny face really tells you that he's evil, but he's not. He's not a villain. He's not a ghost. He's a messenger to Donnie on what he needs to do in order to set the world right. And Frank is played by an actor I love, James Duvall.
You're very right. It is hard to distinguish because even though Frank isn't evil, yes, this bunny suit that they fashioned that he portrays in is really creepy, and he seems more like a messenger of death than this messenger of like guidance. But you know, as the movie goes on, you do find that he is leading Donnie to his destiny to save the planet. But it is revealed later on in another universe that, we see the why he gets the eye hole is because Donnie shoots him, which at first is very confusing. Like the first couple times I watched it, it all comes together in the end. But you're like, why is he like bleeding out of his eye? And is that why he wears the mask? You start thinking of all these other reasons of why he's in a bunny suit when that's not really relevant so much to what's going on in the movie. It was just a sort of a way to make the character seem more strange and mystical.
And it's all connected. When Donnie's communicating with Frank in the liquid mirror, and he starts stabbing the mirror and stabs Frank in the eye, and we don't see blood in that scene, but then the next time we see Frank and Donnie says, "Take off your mask," that's when we see the eye hole. But then at the finale of the film, Donnie shoots the real Frank in the eye. Like, it's all connected, and again posing that question of what is everything predetermined? What is free will? Was this all meant to be? And this very set path of all of these characters around Donnie have been guiding him towards this end result, which is he has to shoot Frank. But the bunny Frank, by guiding Donnie, he prevents his own death, as well as Gretchen, Rose, and Samantha Darko.
And kudos to James Duvall for wearing this bunny suit throughout the entirety of the film. Anytime you see the bunny, it's actually James Duvall in the suit, which another actor might say, you can use me for the one-day shoot where my face is revealed, but I don't want to be covered and have to do all these days of shooting. But he was totally on board and very positive from what I understand about the entire aspect.
I've always heard so many good things about him. He's just like so kind and quiet, and which is also interesting too, to have someone that's so peaceful but also looks kind of punk, looks kind of hip, you know. He's underneath the bunny costume. And when I put on the closed caption with all the dialogue, I think through the dialogue, the way that Frank talks, you can not hear things correctly, but if you actually see what he's saying, he's warning Donnie that people are in danger, everyone's going to die, you have to save them. But I think that the way that he's speaking, where it sounds like it's underwater and creepy and he looks creepy, that just goes right along with misconstruing him. And that misdirection might be intentional for Richard Kelly, but it just adds to the overall mystery of everything.
So just one final thing I'll say about the casting of this is that I always love when we do this section for the episodes, because I can always tell like how well a movie's been casted by how long this little moment takes, because we go into each individual characters, because some movies it's all about the star, it's all about the main character, but I love these ensemble pieces where a little bit more extra time and thought is taken with the secondary and third characters in these movies and how they interact with the main characters.
It makes such a difference. When I rewatched this just last night, still being so struck by the character of Sharita and her relationship with Donnie, and just such a small character in the movie.
I also think too, it's like when you have stronger characters that are just, even if they're only in 1 to 2 scenes, those scenes just don't feel like a throwaway scene to connect a storyline or progress the plot. They feel like their own thing. Like it's just a little bit more of an enjoyable watch for me, especially on multiple viewings, because sometimes after I've seen a movie so many times, I'm just watching individual scenes for the scene anymore, because I know everything that happens in the movie.
And this movie certainly has those scenes you can still go back to. I mean, the head over heels scene is still beautiful, as is the final montage that's over the Mad World cover. And also going back to all of these characters being important. This is the finale of the movie, and we go to each individual character. All of these people that had a relationship with Donnie in some way or another are all affected by Donnie now saving the world, saving everyone's life, and returning this tangential universe back to normalcy, back to the primary universe. And everybody involved was a key player. And Justin, what do you think of the ending of this movie, whether it be that montage or just, everything from Donnie shooting Frank from there on?
Well, the first time I saw this, like I'd said before, I wasn't a fan of the movie, and the ending kind of just annoyed me even more. When I watch it now, I really find the ending to be satisfying. There is a little bit more of a wrap up. I think you get a better sense of like where these alternate universes are placed and how things are connected, but not so much in a way that it's like some shock ending, like in everything is revealed in this last 4 minutes. I don't feel like it's that kind of an ending, and because this movie is so like kind of all over the place, but the dots connect. I think it just, it's worth it to view it multiple times. And then with each time, I feel like this ending makes more sense to me.
One thing I love is that you can watch it and have multiple interpretations of it. But it's always key that there is this apocalyptic rip in the sky, that this is some form of time travel, and that Donnie saves everything. And now, when does Donnie realize that this is what he needs to do? I think that that's open to interpretation. Does he realize that that's what he's doing? And if he does, and he's returned back to the primary universe, and you see him laughing in his bed, why doesn't he move out of the way? What's the point of him dying? Why is he sitting there laughing? Is it that he's enlightened or closer to God, or what would happen if he did live? You know, and I think about that, like, what would happen if Donnie would have lived? He would have had some like crazy godlike complex. Just thinking that I controlled everything that happened, especially because Richard Kelly said that everything in this is not a hallucination. So everything that Donnie saw was something that he saw. I also think that the ending answers the question, does Donnie have mental health issues, or has he been chosen for whatever reason as this kind of superhero, superhuman person who has the ability to get this universe back on track and prevent the primary universe from being destroyed, which in essence is what's going to happen if the tangential universe isn't returned by way of it collapsing on itself in this black hole.
And I got to imagine trying to edit a movie like this would be extremely difficult, because you are throwing around so many ideas, and so much of this movie is jumping around to different universes or different timelines, trying to structure that. You know, someone who's sitting with it, Richard Kelly wrote it, and an editor is sitting in front of a screen and has notes and has the script, but trying to edit this in a way that, okay, like, will an audience follow these timelines, or will they be so confused, or will they give up on the movie? I don't know. To me, it's strange, because I don't know if it was a success or failure, because the first time I saw this, I was just like, what is this? This is just utter nonsense. And then the second time I watched, but there was something about it that struck me, and I kept coming back to it. So I could only imagine this would be really challenging, trying to say the final cut on a movie like this. It's like, okay, this is it. We're not going to change anything else. We did some test screenings. Maybe the audience got it. Maybe they were bored, or maybe they thought, I love how different this is and how unique it is.
And it was a really long, laborious, difficult editing experience. And even though Richard Kelly was kind of editing footage along the way, when it did come down to editing, putting everything together, Sam Bauer was who they wanted to be an editor. He had worked with Richard Kelly before, but he was a first-time editor. And the studio did not want to pair a first-time editor with a first-time director in a movie like this. And had it not been for Flower Films' Nancy Javonen going to bat for Sam Bauer, he wouldn't have been, and it would have been someone else that Richard Kelly may not have trusted as much. And we'll get to this in a second, but the theatrical cut is somewhat different from the director's cut, and we'll talk about those differences in a second. Let's get to the we haven't talked about the music yet. Before we get to the release, the music is a pretty significant part to this film, and also something that Nancy Javonen had a hand in too. Her brother was who recommended do the soundtrack musical composition, a guy named Michael Andrews, and they had to think about the budget. This guy wasn't really known for too much, is certainly not taking an entire movie score. And when you don't have a budget, but you need something huge, you need somebody who's young and hungry, and that was Michael Andrews.
Yeah, and I love the balance of this movie between having this theatrical, somewhat dramatic score, and then mixing the movie in with era-appropriate new wave artists. Sometimes I think that, it can be tricky in a movie, because it's like you can have something where it's just like you're just getting hit in the face with one needle drop after another, or to where it doesn't seem cool or fun anymore. I think this movie does a great job of like using both of those elements, between putting songs that we might be familiar with and then an orchestrated score, and having them kind of connect together in a way that's like well balanced, but also is just enough, like we get the idea, but we're still left for our own minds to calibrate whether or not we think this is like sad or exciting or funny.
I can't help but think that Michael Andrews, being the person who did all of the instrumentation, everything to do with the score, might have had something to do with that, like just one brain focusing on this, because everything is really cohesive and it's always pulsing. There's like a certain industrial sound to it too. And while I agree with you that sometimes I don't want to be emotionally manipulated by the score, watching Forrest Gump, and like I wouldn't normally be crying, but the score would make me cry. Is there even music in the final scene of Donnie Darko? I cry like a whimpering tiny baby in the final scene of Donnie Darko. I'm sure you don't.
I don't.
Yeah.
We have different.
I know.
I do have emotions though. I cry at quite a few things, especially every year that I get older. But where we don't fall a line on is where we cry at certain scenes in movies.
Well, you've just gone on this huge journey with this person who saved everyone, and then you're watching the reactions of his family just learning that he died.
Yeah.
And one more thing about the music. Obviously, the hits from the 80s in this are wonderful. I love the songs even before they were in the movie. But the Mad World cover, the Tears for Fears cover, was by Gary Jules, who was a school friend of composer Michael Andrews. And it was Andrews who called Javon in and said, I know we don't have a big budget, but what if we do a cover of this? And so just Andrews and Gary Jules recorded this at Andrews' home studio. They never thought that this song would pop off as much as it did. And it really did. I don't think it was going to be ever a hit single or anything, but it certainly, if you're going to cover a Tears for Fears song, this was an awesome way to do it. And it was very original, totally different tone than the original song.
When that was, I felt like it got like a really popular there for a moment. It got so popular that like there was like enough people that thought it was an original song because they didn't. It was like, because it wasn't a huge Tears for Fears hit. I mean, it was around, but I think so much time had passed that people are like, man, this is cool. And they do, like, you're right. It's just like a very, like a slower, I would say more like emotionally sung version of the song.
Yeah. I don't know if I should share this, whatever. A long time ago, I had a stalker, and he would leave stuff on my back porch. And one time he left a CD with just one song on it, and it was this cover. And I loved Donnie Darko, but after getting that, I was like, I'm so friggin' creeped out right now. This song has taken a different turn for me, and I never want to hear it again. I've gotten over it. A weird thing to get, and I don't want to know what the motivation behind it was. I don't think it was just, I like the song, I want to share it with you. There was some other type of meaning.
Yeah, it's very creepy. And you'd almost kind of, you don't want to like read into the lyrics of someone else's interpretation of interpreting feelings, or I don't know. That is very, very unsettling.
Sorry, did I just make a pin drop in here, Justin? I've never shared that with you before.
You've told me about a stalker, but you never shared that story.
That part, yeah. Well,
let's talk a little bit about the release and reception of this movie. We've talked about the Sundance Film Festival making and breaking movies on this podcast multiple times, and this was a very buzzed about movie at Sundance. Like, there was a lot of talk about it, and like a breakout performance with Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's kind of a strange movie, and this young director who made this very ambitious project that got all of these well-known actors in it. And so it seemed like one of those movies that you'd read about, like sold for the record amount of money ever at Sundance. But as much buzz was going on, that wasn't necessarily the case with the final week of Sundance.
So even though it was all the buzz, the Sundance, I believe the Sundance cut was a little longer than the theatrical version, but I don't think it was the director's cut. I heard a story about Harvey Weinstein showing up to the premiere of this at Sundance, and he had a Donnie Darko hat on, and no one from the production knew how he got it, because Harvey Weinstein had not been involved with Donnie Darko. But evidently his very presence showing up made some people just go, well, never mind, Weinstein's got this. I'm not going to sit around for this and try to outbid him. So there were some distributors that just left before even seeing the film. The first screening was a complete disaster. And man, it's just a movie like this. I mean, you and I have both said we weren't the biggest fans the first time we saw it. So, I mean, maybe that is indicative of what happened on this first screening. But distributors thought that it was too long, 30 minutes easily needed to be cut out. People weren't comfortable with a teenager shooting someone, especially in the post-Columbine world of after 1999. Distributors on both sides thought that Frank needed to be more of like a stabby type killer, like a straight horror movie theme, which is not going to work in this movie if you watched it at all. But there were a lot of passionate feelings on both sides. People thought that it was the worst movie ever made, and then people thinking that it was breaking conventional rules of filmmaking and thought it was really incredible. Another giant problem was regarding what we just talked about with the music, that the licensed songs that were in it weren't paid for just yet. So there was concern over the songs needing to be cut out entirely, which would have changed a lot about this film, considering the songs with lyrics, Kelly intended for the lyrics to actually be pertaining to the visuals that were happening in the film and the story. So the result was this movie went to Sundance and left with absolutely no deal. So what's going to happen to it after that?
Well, even though Donnie Darko didn't have success at Sundance, it did get interest from Newmarket Films, and Newmarket Films had a private screening of Donnie Darko, and they invited Christopher Nolan and producer Emma Thomas. Really smart move by them, because they had distributed Memento, which was written and directed by Christopher Nolan, and was very successful, but was a very unconventional type film that a lot of people, struggled with, and very similar to the tone of Donnie Darko. Like, it's not just your regular run-of-the-mill structured movie. And Christopher Nolan really enjoyed the movie. He recommended that Newmarket Films should pick up Donnie Darko and distribute it. Nolan's suggestion upon watching the private screening was that they use the title cards to show the time in which things are happening for Donnie Darko. And I think he did something similar to that in Memento. It's been a while since I've seen that. And then plus there was some persuading by producer Drew Barrymore, who Richard Kelly said charmed Newmarket Films and encouraged them in their distribution to release it theatrically, because a lot of times these movies, especially if they went to Sundance, if they didn't get picked up by a company, distributing movies in theaters was like much more costly, because they had to strike up actual film prints. And if the movie didn't get a lot of press at Sundance, that means that they'd have to actually spend a lot of money on promotion and marketing. And so sometimes it was easier just like, let's just release it straight to video, and then maybe it'll show up on cable. But the producers and Richard Kelly really wanted a theatrical presentation. And so Newmarket Films did decide to distribute it theatrically on 50 screens, which is actually, it sounds much smaller than it is, compared to nowadays. But I know like movies like Jim Jarmusch, Dead Man, I remember reading an article where he was like upset because they released it on like 4 screens or something, like a theater in New York and a theater in LA or something, and then just after a week it didn't get moved to any other theaters. So Donnie Darko, even though it was on 50 screens, a lot of times what happens is those plays in the city, and then they ship that print to another city, and then word of mouth kind of travels, and then if it gets successful, they'll strike up more prints to send to other theaters. So Donnie Darko did get, I would say, like a decent release. I was certainly aware of it, that it was like promoted as a movie in theaters, not just like select city type situation.
So people were aware of Donnie Darko, but it just felt like this wasn't the right time for it. Things weren't going right. It was only a month and a half after 9/11 happened, and the advertising did feature a plane crashing. The advertising, therefore, was limited. The initial first run only grossed a little over $500,000, and the Newmarket president said that the movie was just too bleak to be released at the time that it was. Just poor timing for releasing is really what played a lot into this. That didn't stop the movie from going to multiple worldwide film festivals, but no traction was really gained after that 2001 release until about a year later when it was released in the UK. Now, despite all of this, everybody who made the movie, Richard Kelly, Jake Gyllenhaal, everybody in the production was still really proud of this movie. I don't think anyone left the production going, man, this was left out and this was left out. And there was quite a bit left on the cutting room floor, but everyone was pretty happy with it. So when it was released in the UK, it was about a year later in late October of 2002. There was limited advertising again, but there was this weird grassroots like art graffiti advertising campaign. People had heard about this movie, and word of mouth in the UK had given this movie legs again. It made over $2.5 million on its initial theatrical run in the UK. That success was then wafted back to the US through DVD sales and rentals, and this movie started picking up traction again. And I didn't know about it when it was released, but I definitely knew about it after it was released on home video and you could rent it.
Yeah, I was honestly shocked at how, like, I did not know that it kind of bombed in the U.S. because it's just one of those movies that's always been so well known in my mind of like people talking about Donnie Darko. It's like, man, it only made $500,000 in the U.S. box office, but it is interesting you bring up the UK stuff because that's, I think, like it was the same thing that happened with Reservoir Dogs in America. People just didn't warm up to it, but then it hit UK and made like twice as much money, and a year and a half later we're like, oh, we love this movie, how did we miss it, you know?
It is funny, like just the name Donnie Darko, it sounds like a superhero. That name has just been in pop culture lexicon that I would have never thought that this movie bombed at all. But the movie did eventually recoup its budget, definitely made money after the fact, but initially it was pretty scary for Richard Kelly and everybody involved. But Kelly and editor Sam Bauer were afforded the luxury of recutting the film. They spent 3 to 4 months putting in material that they had taken out for the theatrical release. This version wasn't ever meant to nullify the theatrical version. There was just so much that was left on the cutting room floor. And since the movie had now this growing cult fan base, I mean, watching it as a fan of it, it was definitely made for the fans and maybe a little self-indulgent from Richard Kelly, but I don't think that it cheapens the theatrical release. I think all it does is enhances the science fiction aspect to it. There's a lot more explaining about time travel. I think the director's cut makes things a little clearer, but if you're not into it, it might lose you too. There's some close-ups of Roberta Sparrow's philosophy of time travel, extended character interactions, especially between members of the Darko family, and supporting characters get a little bit more screen time, which is nice. The biggest reveal for me, and this is the only thing that changes so much from the theatrical to the director's cut, is that it's revealed that his therapist is giving him placebos. So his medication that he's, whenever Donnie says, "I'm taking my pills, Sam," talking about taking his pills, you think that he is on some type of medication in the theatrical version, but he wasn't. It was all a placebo effect. So that plays more into Kelly's idea that he wasn't hallucinating anything, that this was really happening, and his therapist was trying another form of therapy with him. So I think that is a giant change to the story. Other technical things, which are very obvious depending on how well you know the movie, are musical cues. Song placements are very different in the director's cut. I don't think it takes away from anything, but if you know the theatrical version, you definitely go, wait a second, that's not what the movie opens with. But it is kind of cool. So if you're a fan of it, definitely check out the director's cut. You'll also see some deleted scenes. There's some things that were cut out that I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of. Donnie and Gretchen actually break up during the movie. I'm happy that we don't see a dead Donnie Darko. That was a scene that was cut out, and it is extremely shocking. I'm good with that not being in either version.
Yeah, I've really warmed up to the idea of like seeing director's cuts of things. I was thinking like back in the day, it was like, director's cut. They cut stuff out for a reason. But then, you come to find out like, the studio had a big hand and they trimmed a bunch of stuff. And so now I kind of try to open up my mind a little bit more when I'm sitting down to watch a director's cut. And they're always, sometimes they are a lot more excessive and seem more self-indulgent, but then scenes or relationships that, got left on the editing room floor that gives the movie a little more depth, and it gives the characters more depth so you care about them a little bit more.
So I guess the last thing that we need to mention, I mean, the mythology of Donnie Darko is still continuing to this day. There are websites, there are theories. People love to continue thinking about alternate, universes that exist within Donnie Darko. And even Kelly himself published the Donnie Darko book in 2003, which went into more about the film, more about the philosophy of time travel, sketches, everything that helps the mythology behind the movie, and everybody who's a fan of this movie keep, building it up even 20 years later. There was a sequel in 2009. Kelly did not have any involvement with it. It was called S. Darko. I watched it. It's not at all like Donnie Darko, but it certainly tries to emulate it in every single way possible. Without copying exact shots, there are some things that are exactly like Donnie Darko, and you're just kind of like, what? You could have done something with this, even on a small budget, but why do you have to do that?
Yeah, I watched it as well for this episode, and yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I didn't care for it, but they do, I give them credit that, they cast the same actor that played Donnie Darko's sister. And,
yeah, she was great.
Yeah, and she, kind of makes sense. They give a little bit of story, but yeah, I feel like the rest of the movie, it's like trying so hard to capture the visual essence of the original Donnie Darko, and by doing so, it just kind of makes it like a carbon copy of the original, but without having any of the strength of this like ensemble cast that the original Donnie Darko has. But I was curious, enough to at least give it a go. And it just really, a lot of times when I see something like that, it just kind of makes me appreciate the original a lot more.
And certainly no shade on Devade Chase. I think that she did a great job playing Samantha Darko again. I do think that the idea of having a continuing story that is, how did Donnie's death affect his sister, was certainly a noble idea.
Yeah. Well, we need to move on to our picks of the week, but I just want to say one final thing on Richard Kelly before we go to the next segment. And that's critically, Donnie Darko was hailed quite favorably. And like you were saying, this kind of cult built around Donnie Darko, and it got more popular with every year. And Richard Kelly was sort of given that chance that so few filmmakers get, where they have this kind of an ambitious film that somehow, even though it failed, it got a theatrical distribution, and he was hailed as like the new interesting filmmaker in Hollywood. And so he was given a very, very large budget for his next movie, which was, I would say, twice as ambitious as Donnie Darko, with like more characters and storylines and things that, were really hard to decipher, I think, the first time around, and negatively reviewed, bombed at the box office, was made less money, I think, than Donnie Darko, because it was on 3 times as many screens. So I actually never watched the movie because I just...
Say the name of the movie.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say the name of the movie. That is Southland Tales. I had never watched it just because I had heard so many bad things about it, and so you and I had a screening together and watched it for the first time for both of us. And I didn't actually think it was as terrible as everything I've read, but I definitely understand people's not liking it, because it's almost just kind of like a exercise in excess, where you're getting so much information nonstop, and but I don't feel like it's stacking in any kind of coherent way. Maybe I would speak differently. I've only watched it the one time, and again, I didn't like Donnie Darko the first time I watched it. So maybe a decade from now, I'll be like, Southland Tales, it needs more respect.
I didn't hate it. I thought that it was incredibly ambitious. I don't think it gave my brain enough time to really take in all of the visual elements and story ideas and try to connect the dots. It's just it's another movie that is this giant world that you're trying to get established in. And it's a lot. It's a lot to take in, and definitely a movie you need to see twice, but not in the way that Donnie Darko was, in that you're trying to understand these rules of time travel. This was just like, there's so many characters and this world is insane. Try to make it all make sense.
Yeah. there just wasn't a lot of subtlety to a lot of the characters. Everything was like really big and like in your face.
I
and
feel like
loud.
that was deliberate.
Yeah,
That had to have been deliberate.
But again, I think it's one that I need to see again, but it was still as fun to like kind of watch something. We so seldom get to do that, like watch a movie together that we've never seen, especially one that's been out for a while.
And it was like 3 hours long.
Yeah, it was very long movie, but we did it.
We did.
Well, let's move on to our picks of the week. We'll come back with some final thoughts on Donnie Darko before this episode ends. But Lindsay, for your pick of the week, you did Nowhere. What can you tell me about that?
For all my teenage years and 20s, Greg Araki's 1997 film Nowhere felt like my own special secret movie. This bizarre drug trip into a foreign, interconnected, sex-laden world of impending doom and neon colors. And what simply drew me to the movie in the first place was the cover. It's Beverly Hills 90210 on acid. Now, how is that not going to immediately attract a 16-year-old? And Nowhere opened me up to the world of Greg Araki, whose films I've come to deeply love, appreciate, and sing his praises whenever I can. But here, we focus on this nutso ride of Nowhere. It's one of the more expansive ensemble casts that you'll find. It's littered with famous faces of the time. Nowhere also takes place all in one day, from the morning we're introduced to the main character, Dark, played by James Duvall, who's Frank from Donnie Darko, until we hit the hay with him at the very end of the film's credits. This is an outlandish snapshot of late 90s teen life. Araki has always had a keen grasp on the youth experience, and here it's embodied in an over-the-top yet still relatable story. Intercut and jumping from one character to another, then back again. On the surface, everyone we meet is planning on one thing, getting to some guy named Juji Fruit's house party, and it's going to be epic. But we're going to go off on lots of tangents on the way there. Nowhere's constant. If you're not listening or look away, you're going to miss something bizarre or some hilarious, distinctive dialogue. The most striking elements of the film are the visionary set pieces, loud wardrobes concocted from unique thrift store finds, multiple quick cuts for dramatic exaggeration. Everything is really a canvas for this nostalgic yet ahead of its time kind of art piece. Atop this colorful Los Angeles world, contrasting to the peppiness of the visuals, is an overwhelming sense of doom. Mentions of the end of the world, the coming apocalypse, the rapture, the crushing teenage feeling that nothing will ever get better are all interwoven into the story. It never feels like it's plugged in without a point, but it's unpredictable what's in store for us on the way to Juji Fruit's party. On my last rewatch of this, I kept an ongoing list of topics either directly or indirectly hit upon in Nowhere, like all forms of gayness and everything in between, the difficulties of polyamory, eating disorders, recreational drug use, as well as the darkness of dependency, suicide, manipulative men and sexual violence, feeling lost and lonely, fitting sex into every conversation, Christian overtones trying to invade, control, and mislead, surprisingly kinky S&M scenes cut together with conservative ideas of sexual perversion, reversed traditional gender roles, being ashamed of virginity, and the shame of being raped. Throw in some ridiculous adolescent love, so much drinking and driving, and if all that wasn't enough, some kind of serpent alien that seems to be stalking our main character, Dark. Aliens are a thing in many Araki films, but I like to forget that when I'm watching Nowhere that I don't already know that. With all of that, plus the previously mentioned foreboding sense of impending apocalypse, the entire film's dialogue is an impressive, constant string of Valley Girl and Surfer Boy stereotypical California speak, as well as being grossly descriptive and overly sexual for comedic impact. One-liners and entire conversations can be like this. It's outlandish, dramatic, offensive, but always ridiculously creative. And pair that with the teen angst that courses through the film's veins. It's like, we all know deep down in our souls that our generation's gonna witness the end of everything. You can see it in our eyes. I'm doomed. I'm 18 years old and I'm totally doomed. Like, they're just really amazing pieces of dialogue that are so exaggerated and dramatic. Be prepared for extremes and contrasting emotional scenes back to back with Nowhere. It's hyperbolic, perverse, and cringeworthy at times. Remember, though, to keep a sense of humor, even through the darkness. Araki keeps a light tone, but always reminds us through music, the eeriness of being lonely, or disturbing televangelism, that this movie is unlike anything else you've ever seen. Nowhere's the third installment of Araki's Teenage Apocalypse trilogy, the first of the series being 1993's Totally Fucked Up, followed by 1995's The Doom Generation, both of which also star James Duvall. Before I close out, since there is such a massive cast here, there's just not enough time to go into that, so let me do some name checks of people you might recognize. Christina Applegate, Rachel True, Guillermo Diaz, Mina Savari, Ryan Phillippe, Heather Graham, Kathleen Robertson, Rose McGowan, Shannon Doherty, Denise Richards, Scott Kahn, Debbie Mazar, and my personal 2 favorite appearances of John Ritter and Beverly D'Angelo. And these are just the folks that you might recognize by name. Mostly everyone else is someone you'd recognize by their face, even Brady Buncher's Eve Plum and Christopher Knight. So if you want more of that Donnie Darko into the world black hole vibe but need something a little more off the wall, it might be fun to throw this one on after Donnie. Definitely different tones, but Darko's James Duval totally carries this entire journey through nowhere.
And I know Strand Releasing is putting out a 4K restoration of this that should be either in theaters now or it's hitting theaters. But before that, they did, didn't you see Doom Generation? They restored that and did a theatrical.
Yeah, and that looked, it looked wonderful. It was crazy to see that movie on the big screen. And I saw Nowhere, not the new 4K version that's coming out, but I did see that at Arcadin Cinema locally. And I'd never seen that with, I don't think anyone, really. I've never seen this movie, watched it with anybody else. And seeing this movie with an audience is a really... I mean, anytime you see a movie that's like overly sexual and just extreme in a lot of ways, it's funny to watch it with an audience. It's just a whole different vibe.
Yeah, it's awesome that they showed that. If you're listening to us in St. Louis and if you haven't been to the Arcadin Cinema, Micro Cinema in South City, it's really great. They're programming every month. I can't get out there hardly ever because of my work schedule, but every month I see their programming. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're just showing stuff that hardly anybody does.
Yeah, I love that place. All right, Justin, it is your turn. You did Prisoners, right, for your pick of the week?
That is correct.
All right, let's hear about it.
So my pick of the week is pretty humorless. I did a rewatch before we did this episode, and it was like right before I went to sleep. And man, what a movie not to watch if you don't want nightmares. It is a very, very dark and gut-wrenching movie by Denis Villeneuve, who just had another blockbuster hit with the second installment of the Dune series. He's one of those directors now that if he has a movie coming out, I'll go check it out in theaters. And this was actually the first movie I had heard of his or heard of him as a director. My buddy Jason texted me and he's like, oh, have you seen the movies Enemy or Dune with Jake Gyllenhaal? And I had just been kind of coming off of a huge, I'd watched like Zodiac like multiple times in the last month. And, we were just kind of going back and forth like, man, I'm really getting into Jake Gyllenhaal. Like his performance in that is so good. And so he recommended these 2 movies, Enemy and Prisoners. And I just wasn't prepared for Prisoners. In and of itself, it's a simple story of a man played by Hugh Jackman and his best friend played by Terrence Howard, and their daughters are playing together and they get kidnapped by an anonymous person in a gigantic RV. And right away it's kind of a movie that you've seen before with the, they file a report and the detectives get involved and, they know you're on a limited amount of time. Generally when there's a kidnapping, especially of children, it generally ends up being bad within the first 24 or 48 hours. So they know they're on a time crunch to either find them or find clues and figure out who did it. And this movie is kind of a mystery, so I won't really unravel a lot of what happens if you haven't seen it, but it's the detectives, one of them played by Jake Gyllenhaal. They find a suspect, they apprehend him. They have, he drives the RV that fits the description of what happened, but they don't really have anything to hold him. But Hugh Jackman believes that this is the guy who kidnapped his daughter. The kidnapper, creepily played by Paul Dano, another actor who is always putting in these like kind of bizarre, unique but effective performances. They have to let Paul Dano's character go, and so Hugh Jackman kidnaps the Paul Dano character, takes him to this building that he owned, and essentially begins to torture him for information. It gets pretty bleak from this point on in the movie. He's trying to get information from him. Meanwhile, Jake Gyllenhaal's detective character is trying to, he's full of regret because he didn't want to let that guy go. So he's trying to piece together if this is connected to these other kidnappings that have happened in this town. And he's trying to put this whole puzzle together. So the movie at times is about a parent's like loss and dealing with that struggle of like the possibility of your child being like ripped away from you. But then there's also this detective mystery that's happening that's intercut in between what the Hugh Jackman character's going through and the Terrence Howard character's going through. That's probably all I'll say about the plot wise, because if you haven't seen it, it really builds nicely, and your mind is like, is there going to be any sense of hope in this movie? Because it's filled with so much dread, but I promise you it pays off. And it's worth putting in the time. Again, not the best selection to watch right before you're going to go to bed after you've had a really long work day. Usually I try to put on something light, but I knew I needed to get one more viewing of this in before the episode. And this is the movie that really sold me on Jake Gyllenhaal. I don't always like the movies that he does, but I always feel like he is attracted to certain characters and is interested in doing more than just kind of doing a movie that's like a concept type thing. He's really picks roles that are not always the most savory characters, like they're kind of despicable at times, or they're a little rough around the edges. Recently, if you've ever seen the movie Nightcrawler, it's another good one of his where he plays a much more unpleasant character, but is utterly fascinating. So anytime he's in the movie, I'm generally fully on board with it, with the exception of, I was kind of, we won't get into a current hot topic, but the Roadhouse movie, he's doing the role that was portrayed by Patrick Swayze. That I didn't watch the movie, but that's the only one where I'm like, I don't know. I'm gonna wait on that one for a while, I think, before I'm ready to give that one a go.
I felt like it might have hurt your heart. I haven't asked you about this because I felt like it might actually.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like, it's not a shock they're remaking everything that I've loved but that particular movie, it just seems like why even, why go there? But anyway, yeah, our picks of the week are Prisoners and Nowhere. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even chill.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shut?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
Last year, when Ant-Man Quantumania came out, I got scooped on a Murray moment I'd been sitting on for a while. And just this past March of 2024, this Murray moment even had a little mini resurgence in cyberspace. This is going to deal with superheroes, and since Donnie Darko himself can kind of qualify as a type of superhero, I'm picking this time to use it. Back before his household name-making years on SNL, predating his stint with TVC episode 61's Murray moment, our Billy entered the Marvel superhero universe as Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, on the Fantastic Four's 13-episode radio show. And I'm just going to say this now, I've got to skip over a lot of interesting details in this time period in order to keep this piece focused, but I'm positive we'll return to this era again. The grassroots of this began in 1974 when John Belushi relocated from Second City, Chicago to New York to produce the National Lampoon's Radio Hour, and he wanted to recruit some Second City friends both from Chicago and Toronto to follow him for this new venture. At this point, Billy had proven he had the improv and comedy chops to hold his own, but he and Belushi weren't totally tight, yet John still wanted to hire him for the radio and theatrical version of the Lampoon show, and this would be the beginning of their friendship. Trying to exist in New York meant Bill had to seek out what jobs he could to sustain himself, and I don't think he officially moved there until he landed the second season of SNL, but I'm fuzzy on those details. Somewhat after producers Peter Lewis and Bob Michelson began winding down the Lampoon show, they wanted to start another creative radio venture, a multi-episode Fantastic Four radio series for Marvel, and it was Michelson who recruited Bill to play the Human Torch. Peter Lewis said Bill was the most dynamic of the Lampoon players, though co-stars Belushi and Gilda Radner had been asked to join the team, but both declined. SNL was on the horizon for them, but not yet for Bill, but he solidly landed this soon-to-be nationally syndicated radio series for this Stan Lee comic creation. Bill would be paid scale, just like anyone else of his stature at the time. He'd created a name for himself by performing on stage for a few years, but was still raw, which was a coveted quality for stage performances. The Fantastic Four, however, would just be voice acting, and he wasn't as well versed in this area of performance. Rounding out the rest of the cast would be, well, first off the narrator, genius, and co-creator Stan Lee, and the rest of the superhero team, all seasoned performers. Bob Maxwell as Mr. Fantastic, Cynthia Adler as the Invisible Girl, Jim Pappas as the Thing, of course Bill as the Human Torch, and their arch nemesis Dr. Doom, played by Jerry Terhayden. The episodes were adapted from early Fantastic Four issues, including the team's origin story and facing off with the previously mentioned Dr. Doom, the Mole Man, the Hate Monger, all of those classic villains. Bill kind of stood out among these other actors, though. Peter Lewis, who was also a scriptwriter, once said, "At the time, he wasn't the strongest of actors," going on to say that Bill would regularly miss his cues, trip up during recorded line readings, and, the infamous Billy trait of just showing up late to recording. Honestly, he wasn't all too familiar with these characters, or the Marvel universe, really. To my knowledge, Peter admitted, Bill had never heard of the Fantastic Four. Due to budget restrictions, the radio show would be short-lived. With as intimidating as the Marvel universe has become nowadays, something as simple as a radio show is a true delight. Well, to me at least. You've got to use your imagination, which can be even more entertaining than even the most wild contemporary CGI out there. Not to keep wanking on here, but since this Murray moment began with my whole, I knew about this before the masses, I went back into my text to find out the exact date of when I learned about this because I freaked out and I knew I texted at least one person. And it wasn't you, actually, Justin, not yet. Turns out I texted your bandmate, Sean, my ex-bandmate, about this before I told you on March 11th of 2021. But my excitement of this discovery yielded absolutely no response from Sean. However, the day that I told you, Justin, was October 27th of 2021. And coincidentally, only one day later, Bill would appear via Skype on Jimmy Kimmel Live to promote The French Dispatch, and Kimmel would confront him about the rumors of Bill being in the future Ant-Man Quantumania. Then, Jimmy asked Bill about the Fantastic Four radio show. "Do you remember doing that?" Kimmel asks. And Bill responds, "All I remember saying is, 'Flame on!'" which was Johnny Storm's catchphrase in the series. I didn't see this interview until just recently when sitting down to do this Murray moment. So if you want to go on an auditory adventure where your mind creates the visuals, listen to all of these Fantastic Four episodes. I love listening to this while walking my dogs with headphones in. It was a constant delight to hear my man Bill throughout every single step in these superhero adventures. You can find all of the episodes in two places. I listened to them individually on archive.org. Just search archive.org and Fantastic Four and you'll find all 13. And someone called Overlord Radio has uploaded all 13 episodes onto a YouTube playlist, so search it out on YouTube. I really hope someone out there listening to this takes the trip. It's such a divergence from life in 2024, so if you can allow yourself to accept a radio program from 50 years ago, it's a pretty fun experience.
That's pretty wild. It's been unrelated to that. It's been fun seeing Bill Murray promote the new Ghostbusters movie. And it was nice. We both got to check out the new movie and to see, he's in it for a very, very minute amount of time, but it's always funny to see him, on screen. And I feel like we so seldom see him in big movies anymore. So it was kind of wild to see him in some big, huge summer blockbuster movie.
And he's really been promoting the hell out of this one too.
Yeah, it seems like he was feeling a lot more cheery about it these days than he has in the past.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks so much for that Murray moment.
Of course.
Did you have any final thoughts on Donnie Darko before we wrap this thing up?
Let me go through all my notes here.
Checking your notes.
Let me go through all my notes here. Yes, I definitely do. Where to even start, man? I've got a lot of final thoughts. There's so many little tidbits out there about this movie, but I'll focus in on two. One, we talked already about how the songs from the director's cut and the theatrical release, they vary in their placement. There's one thing that you would never know, and that is the infamous Sparkle Motion choreographed scene was originally done to Pet Shop Boys' West End Girls, but they couldn't afford that song, so they had to recut using the same footage, and then it is what we see in the movie to Duran Duran's Notorious. And, even though that scene is all about exploiting children, I love that scene. I never get tired of it. And I guess my last final thought would be when Gretchen and Donnie are in the movie theater and they're watching Evil Dead. Originally, that was supposed to be Chud. And even Donnie has, I think he calls Patrick Swayze's character a total chud in the movie. And that was supposed to be Chud, but they couldn't get the licensing. It was really difficult to get Chud for some reason.
It's so wild to me because
Chud
just seems way less known than Evil Dead. Like it seems like Evil Dead would be so much harder to get. But
yeah. I also started thinking about when I remembered Donnie saying he's such a chud. I started thinking about, man, that's a good insult, actually. Cannibalistic humanoid, so you're not even human. Underground dweller. I'm going to start calling people chuds, actually.
What a way to work in the acronym explanation of chud.
Yeah. But so they couldn't get Chud. So Linda McDonough, who worked at Flower Films, she was friends with Sam Raimi and Anchor Bay, and she asked Sam Raimi, hey, do you mind if could we use Evil Dead? And Sam Raimi, being the cool guy that he can be, agreed to this and did it free of charge, actually, which is pretty nuts. He didn't have to do that. Anchor Bay certainly didn't have to do it free of charge. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Justin, what about you? Any final thoughts?
Not so much about Donnie Darko, but just with Richard Kelly, just having watched all of his movies in the last few weeks, just really fascinating to me of this person who is makes his first splash at 26 and he only makes 3 movies, and then he's got a lot of credits as a producer, but is someone who's has a unique perspective and original story writing. It's wild to me, especially in a very original content starved Hollywood that we have right now. It's just Richard Kelly, someone lining up to give him an opportunity to put something brand new that no one's ever heard of or seen. It's not a part of some sort of intellectual property or franchise or something. I did watch The Box the other night, and that movie, it's probably his most straightforward movie. I think maybe it almost feels like he was I can't do a straightforward movie studio system, and I enjoyed it. I think it was another one that kind of got...
That's with Cameron Diaz, right?
Yeah, and that one kind of got battered in the reviews, but it's a pretty entertaining movie. I mean, it seems like the idea of it seems more of something that would be like a Twilight Zone episode, kind of stretched out a little bit, but I really enjoyed it. It makes for a nice, entertaining, quick thriller. It's probably his shortest movie as well.
I know that you gave this movie to me, and I still need to watch it.
I think you'll like it.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed our episode on Donnie Darko. I just wanted to state that we are not Donnie Darko experts here. There was a lot of information that we tried to cram in, and we had a limited amount of time to research. So I know there's so much written on Donnie Darko. It's kind of reason why I'm have avoided doing a Star Wars movie on here or Blade Runner or something. So people that are the Donnie Darko experts, we hope we at least didn't anger you in what you've listened to in this episode.
It is totally one of those reactionary movies that people get defensive about. But I mean, that says something about the movie and what it means to people. And we appreciate this movie so much. And I'm really happy that we finally did it.
Same here. Well, next month, we're doing another movie that was quite divisive with audiences. It gaining a cult following, people absolutely loving it, and people saying it's one of the worst films ever made. And I cannot really believe that we're doing this movie. I'm pretty excited.
I'm so happy you finally agreed to it.
Yeah, that we will be doing Showgirls next month.
Yes.
And I'm excited for this ride. I just ordered this brand spanking exclusive awesome copy from Vinegar Syndrome, and so I ordered 2 of those.
Thank you, Justin.
And so I'm excited to dig into that and take this journey with you on Showgirls. So that's coming up next month. Until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reaper.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, guys.